Hello everybody, my name is Rachel and welcome to another weekly reading wrap-up. I've had the worst case of brain fog today. I think I must have slept in too long, and I'm filming much later in the day than I usually do, so I am just out of it and very distracted by all the things I need to get done on a Sunday before the work week starts up again. So sorry if this is kind of quick. I'm going to start off with the comics, graphic novels, and manga that I read this past week. I did read the two comics that I mentioned in my last Friday Reads video. I read the conclusion to The Wicked and the Divine. This is volume 9, OK. The series is written by Kieron Gillen and the artwork is by McKelvie. And obviously this is the end of the series. I'm not going to say anything about what's in it. I really enjoyed it though. It did not end the way that I would have predicted, but I actually really enjoyed the conclusion. It just worked really well for me and I cried through the whole last issue. I was not expecting that. So I am very happy that this series went out on a high note for me. It just worked. For all the ups and downs with the quality and the coherency of the series, I was glad that it pretty much stuck the landing. And yes, I read Giant Days of Volume 11. This is written by Allison and the artwork is by MacLeod. I loved it. I gave this one 5 stars. I continue to just love the humor and I relate so hard to some very, very specific things and it makes my day. I love Daisy. I was also really feeling Susan in this one. The whole beginning of this when Susan comes home to the neighborhood children. If you know anything about my life, I have neighbors with 7 children. They have a trampoline and their kids also love to play football and soccer across all the neighbors' yards. I'm not as brave as Susan is though. I'm also not as sleep deprived and exhausted. Anyway, I love this series so much and it is going to come to an end very soon. I gather there will be 2 more volumes and the single issues are almost done running. So sometime in 2020 the series will be over for me and I'm happy about that because I like it when series have planned endings, but I'm also sad because this is probably the single most consistently good, high quality comic series I've read from beginning to end. There have been no dips in quality for me except for I think one of the holiday specials I really didn't care about, but all of the main storyline, all the main issues and volumes have been excellent. So yeah. Speaking of excellent things, I read The Tea Dragon Festival by Katie O'Neill. This is a children's graphic novel and it's kind of a follow-up to The Tea Dragon Society that I know many people have read and loved. I really loved The Tea Dragon Festival. It's a bit longer. I felt like it had more of a plot to it from what I remember of the Society one. It was so good. It's so sweet and cute. The artwork is lovely. The message is lovely. And there's just this effortless amount of diversity and representation in the cast of characters. It's worked in so naturally and I love it. The main character, Rin, of this one is non-binary. I don't think that's actually mentioned in the text, but the beginning of the book has like a cast of characters and Rin's pronouns are they, them, and I was really happy to see that. I was most excited though to find out that some of the characters are deaf and like the whole community uses sign language. I've never seen sign language in a comic before or in a graphic novel, and that was really cool. So this was just heartwarming and fun, adorable and beautiful, all the things. Highly recommended if you just want something heartwarming and sweet to read. And the manga that I read this week was My Brother's Husband, Volume 2 by Gengoroh Tagame. This is a duology, so this volume was the conclusion of the story. This is about attitudes towards homosexuality in Japan. The main character, kind of the perspective character in this story is a Japanese man named Yaichi, I think is his name. I'm not sure how to pronounce that. His twin brother came out as gay when they were teenagers, and then his brother moved to Canada and married a man and then died. And his husband, a Canadian man named Mike, visits Japan and visits Yaichi and his family to learn more about Japan and his deceased husband's family. And Yaichi is a single father. He's divorced and he's raising his daughter Kana, who is very young and completely in love with her Canadian uncle Mike. This is a really good story. I do think that I enjoyed this second volume a teensy bit more than the first. Not really sure why, but I suspect it's because this is the conclusion and it ended really well. I loved what the story had to say about family and acceptance and tolerance, and there was some really good internal character development with the main character. I really enjoyed that. So this is something I would highly recommend reading. It was really well done. And then the non-comic things that I read The Comedy of Errors by William Shakespeare. This is a very short comedy. I think it might be one of Shakespeare's shortest plays. I read the entire thing in a single evening, and I usually take 2 days to read one of these plays. It was fine. I don't usually find Shakespeare's comedies to be funny while I'm reading them. The only exception has been Much Ado About Nothing, the only Shakespeare play to make me laugh out loud multiple times the first time that I read it. That's kind of a high bar, and none of the other comedies by Shakespeare have really matched up to that for me. But yeah, The Comedy of Errors, this is a farce, a comedy about mistaken identity. There are 2 sets of twins that have been separated in the story, and they keep getting mistaken for each other and tangled up in each other's lives and everything. And I didn't find it to be funny, but it was an enjoyable enough read, so there's that. I finally know what The Comedy of Errors is about, and I never knew that before. I read this book on zero waste living. It's called 101 Ways to Go Zero Waste by Kathryn Kellogg. Kellogg is a pretty well-known spokesperson for the zero waste movement. I'd heard of her before. This book is all right. It is really just a list of 101 tips and topics and swaps you can make to minimize your waste and all of that. I did not find it very helpful because I've already read a lot of this advice elsewhere in other books and on blogs, and honestly I think that this is the book packaging of a lot of content that Kellogg wrote for her blog, so you could probably find a lot of this for free, readily accessible on her website, with helpful hyperlinks to things. I have 3 main criticisms of this book. It's not a bad book, but there are 3 things about it that irk me a little bit. Number 1, she does not cite any sources for her information. She states a lot of things as facts, as like scientific fact about health and toxins and all of that, but she doesn't tell you where she got any of that information. So it's kind of on the reader to fact check what she's talking about, and I think that was lazy and not a very responsible thing to do in a book like this. Second, she doesn't tell you about a lot of resources, as in she'll tell you use X instead of Y, but she won't tell you like a specific brand or what she uses. She does sporadically but not consistently, and there's no section in the back to list online resources or further reading or anything like that. So I read half of this book while sitting in front of a computer Googling things to find out, like, okay, you say that you can find toothpaste in metal tubes. I've never heard of that. Where are you getting yours? Let me go Google that, because she doesn't actually tell you. And once again, like, if she's living this lifestyle, if she's tested a lot of things, give me specifics, give me brand names, something like that. And then the third thing is not a criticism of this book specifically, but just generally of a lot of things I've read in like plastic-free living, zero waste living, and all of that. Most of this advice is really, really difficult for the average American to follow. If you live on the coast, if you live in New York City, if you live in California like Kellogg does, if you live in a really dense urban center, then you will have access to a lot of the resources and services that people like Kellogg advise you turn to minimize your waste, but those things do not exist for most Americans in smaller towns in the Midwest, in the country, or whatever. So out of 101 tips in this, somebody like me can only do maybe a third of them, and that's frustrating, and it's understandable, but I wish that that was acknowledged and that it was talked about more, that there's a lot of advice and that it's okay if you can't follow all of it. Even if you are willing, even if you want to, sometimes it's just not possible, and I would like for someone to come out and say you don't need to feel guilty about not being able to do all of this stuff. But anyway, aside from those criticisms, if you are new to the concept of zero waste or something similar to this, it's a decent book to begin with, but honestly, I think you could find the same information with more helpful links if you just go to somebody's blog instead. My neighbors just came home, so if you hear barking dogs, basketballs, or screaming children in the background, that would be why. I only have one more book to talk about though, so I'll do this pretty quickly. That book is The Twisted Ones by T. Kingfisher, which is a pen name of Ursula Vernon. Vernon is one of my favorite authors. I love her as a personality, as a person. I love her as an author and as an illustrator. So I was gonna pick up anything that she wrote, even if it was a horror novel. So yeah, this is a scary book, not super scary. I think that if you read horror or suspenseful books, thrillers on a regular basis, you won't think this is scary at all, but I'm very easy to creep out, very easy. So this novel is about a woman named Mouse who is asked to clean out her dead grandmother's house. When she gets to the house, she finds out her grandmother was a hoarder. The inside of the house is horrible, and then strange things start happening. She discovers the diary notes of her step-grandfather, which describe some things that she's not sure if he was really seeing things or if he was senile, and it gets creepy really fast. I did find the first half of this to be the scariest. That's the part where Mouse is fully living in the real world where nothing like this happens and then suddenly has to admit that otherworldly, fantastical, scary things exist. And that collision of the real world with the terrifying was terrifying. The second half of the book though, which fully immerses you in the other world, in that aspect of it, read a lot more like dark fantasy, and at that point it ceased to be scary to me. So it was much easier to handle after the halfway point for me. I did enjoy this mainly because I just enjoy the types of stories that Vernon writes. I really love her sense of humor. I liked the main character in this. The situation, minus the scary bits, was interesting on its own. And it was just funny. I actually thought that there was a ton of humor in this, in that practical way that Vernon writes about scary or inexplicable, fantastical things. I really enjoy that. So, while I'm not one to really read or recommend scary stories, this one I enjoyed, and I think more people should probably read it. Only if you can handle the scary things though. That is everything that I read this past week. I am now going to go chill and let my brain wander off in whatever direction it apparently wants to go in. Let me know if you have read any of these books I've talked about this week. Leave me some comments down below. Thank you so much for watching as always, and I will be back to talk to you again very soon. And until then, bye.